And how are you this morning? Welcome. Welcome to Buckeye Wars. This is just a little, a little series, I guess, that I've put together. Little snippets, little stories, little memories of what it was like for me growing up in El Dorado Hills, California, back in the 70s and the 80s. And I had a memory I wanted to share with you. Loud car going by. I'm sitting in the parking lot waiting for stuff. Anyway, down the hill from us was Lake Natomas, and it had a dam on both ends of it. It had the Folsom Dam at one end, and the dam at Hazel on the other end, and in between it was blocked up and formed a kind of a lake, and it was a really good recreation area. And my father knew this when I was just a little guy. He used to take me to a place, little state park, gravel. You'd go in there and you'd park and you'd hope that your car wouldn't get stuck in the gravel. But it was a great place to screw around. It had shallow areas and it had deeper areas because it was kind of a cove off of the lake. And the lake was kind of river like. There was a decent current going on, so it was best for a child and his father to stay in the little cove. Anywho, my grandfather had given us a cane pole. If I remember right, it had about, maybe 4 sections to it. And you'd screw it together, and the length of the whole shebang was probably anywhere from 10 to 15 feet long. And you could tie your fishing line to the end of that, as well as a bobber and a weight and a hook. And for a kid, a little guy, it was perfect because you could hold on to that and it would hold it out over the water just deep enough that the little bluegills could get at it. And this was one of the very first times that I had been fishing, and my dad showed me how to put a worm on the hook and how to watch the bobber. And by damned if I didn't catch a little bluegill that was about 3 inches long. And I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And I wanted to take that little guy home and eat it, because that's what fishermen do. I wanted to eat my catch. So we did. We took it home, and my dad was kind of giggling at me, and he showed me how to clean it. He cut off the head and he cut off the tail and he gutted it and made it all ready to eat. And of course, after taking the head off and the tail off, there was almost nothing left. And I looked down at it and I said, never mind. But then in times after, we would go back to the same little cove, and I believe it was called either Weber Creek or Webster Creek, and it's still there. And a great little recreation area. People launch their canoes and kayaks and little kind of like surfboards that you stand on, and you have a long paddle that you paddle anyway. It's a good recreation area and access to the lake. Anyway, there was also little fingers to the cove that were shallower, and this was prime area for other wildlife, and my dad knew this as well. and he would make sure that we had on our water shoes, and we would go and we would wade into the back little fingers of this cove, and we would chase pollywogs. Now, this wasn't your typical little bitty black squirming pollywogs. These were big suckers. They were about the size of a quarter. Some of them were even bigger, maybe even the size of, they had heads on them about the size of a $50. And of course, those were bullfrog pollywogs. Big suckers. And we'd chase those through this little finger of the cove and try to catch them. And I was a little kid, and I was quick as lightning. And I caught me a bunch of them. We had probably 10 to 15 of them that we put in an old coffee can, and we took those home. And my brother at the time was just a little bitty guy. He had just come out of being an infant, and he was now a toddler. And we still had his little blue, I want to call it kind of like a tub that my mom would use to bathe him. Little bitty thing. But it was just the right size to keep these pollywogs in. And we had it up against the wall on the outside of the garage, but inside our little the starting of our backyard. So it was protected from the rest of the world, and we could open the sliding glass door, and we could go down the 3 steps to our little backyard patio. And this was up against the wall of our garage, and filled with water and filled with the pollywogs that we had caught. And for a kid to watch those pollywogs become frogs was absolutely fantastic, because, you know, one day it was a pollywog, and then the next day that pollywog had a couple of legs coming out of it. Wow. And then a little while longer, it had 4 legs coming out of it. It still had its big ass pollywog head and its big old pollywog tail, but it had 4 feet. And then we'd watch it for next few days or however long it was, and the tail would get shorter and shorter and shorter, and the head would become more defined, and by damned if them pollywogs didn't turn into frogs. And for a kid, that was fabulous. And then we had frogs. Now, we also had a little pond, which was kind of butt up against the house and the garage, which it was maybe 5 feet by 3 feet by maybe 2.5 feet deep. And it was also rigged with a little waterfall. So when our pollywogs turned into frogs, we put them in that pond. Now, of course, they didn't want to stay, but as a kid, I didn't know that. We put them in there and hoped that they would find a home and just be great little frogs. And, after a couple of days, they wandered off, got caught by cats or whatever. But that whole process of being able to catch the pollywogs and then watch the pollywogs turned into frogs and then try to keep the frogs as our pets, you can't beat that with a stick. It was awesome. Taught me about wildlife and taught me about how to take care of something. It was awesome. Anyway, how's that for a story? That's what it was like growing up in El Dorado Hills back when I was a kid in the 70s and the 80s. Thank you for joining me for Buckeye Wars.